Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Life Shift podcast. I am here with Steve. Hello, Steve.
Hi, man. How you doing?
Pretty good. Well, thank you for wanting to be a part of the Life Shift podcast. This has been a journey that I never knew that I needed and I never expected. But for anyone listening that's brand new to the Life Shift podcast, this show really stems from my own personal experience. When I was 8, my mom was killed in a motorcycle accident. And at that moment in time, my parents were divorced, lived states apart, and I lived mostly with my mom. And at that moment, everything in my life changed from what it was to something that no one could have expected, kind of like a blank slate. And growing up, I just was like, do other people have these singular moments in their lives in which everything kind of changes? Turns out people have lots of them, but that one was very significant to me. So I've had the fortune of talking to over 150 people now about these line in the sand type moments in which one day to the next, everything kind of changes. So I just am so thankful that so many strangers like yourself, Steve, are willing to have this conversation, because my real goal is that there's someone out there maybe feeling super alone in their circumstance, and they hear somebody's story and they feel, oh, I'm not the only one that feels this way. And then they feel hope or inspiration to move through it. So once again, thank you for wanting to be a part of this. So before we get into your story, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about who Steve is in 2024.
Well, I am retired. I spent the majority of my life in the custom clothing business. I have been married for 52 years to my wife, Lenny. We have 3 daughters, 2 granddaughters. We live most of our married lives in Delaware, Ohio, just outside Columbus. For a while, I was the sports information director at Ohio Wesleyan University. In 1958, when I was 9 years old, after having spent my early years in a normal fashion, I went to the local movie theater. Guy came up to me, asked me for some help. Then he raped me. He threw me up against a wall and he choked. Now, it seems to be similar for what I felt to what a lot of people feel who have an occurrence like that. And I was scared and lonely and lost, but I also felt somehow it was my fault. Why did he pick me? Did I have a glow about me that said, come get me? I don't know. But I decided not to tell anybody.
Yeah.
And I didn't for 30.
Wow. So you kept that inside.
Kept it inside.
I'm so sorry that you experienced that. It's something that we would never wish on our worst enemy, something like that, and to a child. I can imagine why and how you absorbed like some kind of shame that you should not have, that was not something that you should have taken on. But I would imagine also at the time period, people weren't like, had you shared that, what would society have, how would society have responded in that way as well? Do you think that plays into it?
They would have said I'm making it up, that it never happened.
Right. Like people don't
That's
do
a
that.
long time ago, and it's getting better today.
Yeah.
But back then, there was not even any help for a young kid like me,
right,
who'd gone through that situation.
Did you tell no one? You said you didn't tell anyone for 30 years, not a soul?
No. I didn't even tell my wife until 2015.
Wow. Well,
and we've been married for over 40 years at that time.
And you kept that a secret because of the shame that you absorbed? Not rightfully so, but because of that, or just...
Well, I wouldn't say that's the reason. I would say I just shut it out of my mind.
Fair. Trauma response.
Right.
Yeah. But it was still probably sitting there, right? Because I would imagine that somehow affects you in some way moving forward.
What happened very quickly, within 3 or 4 months, I was in 4th grade and I didn't know what the hell was happening. Ended up, I was having my first depressive episode.
Yeah.
It lasted for several months. I didn't know what the hell was going on.
Yeah.
I felt
What were some of the things that were happening? Just the way you were feeling?
It's very difficult to describe the feeling because most people don't understand it. They'll tell you, oh, go read a book, take a bite. Right. But anyway, it was like feeling worthless, like I'm worth nothing. I don't have any love to share. I don't have anybody loving me. Later on, it became suicidal ideations. And at the time when I had this, unfortunately, I didn't realize that it was on a kind of like a roller coaster ride where I would go from depression for however long my cycle was
Right.
and I'd get better and things would go all right. And then I'd fall back into that depressive state again.
So it was like deep, deep, and then you'd be fine again, kind of like dismiss it and then go back deep into that? Or did you
Well,
have these highs?
I would not say I was fine again, but I was a
Okay.
lot better.
Okay. So it wasn't as dire, maybe, in that sense?
It was better than that,
Okay.
but things started happening to me.
Mm,
I would get physical aches and pains. I would feel like the flu, although I never had a temperature or
right.
anything. It was just all of a sudden these body things came up,
Yeah.
and that is fairly normal.
From trauma like that.
Yes.
Yeah. I
Depressive,
talked
being depressed.
from being depressed, but I would also venture to say that this trauma that you experienced as that young child, some of that, when you push that down, I would imagine that can play itself into a physical manifestation of your body kind of feeling that
Absolutely.
way too. Because I
Yes.
talked to someone about he was sexually abused as I think a 6-year-old, and he pushed it down. And about at 23, he like on a dime turned in a sense where his body started like chronic pain in certain areas, and there was like no way out of it, like no relief from it. Turns out he remembered then about the trauma that he had pushed down.
Yeah.
So it sounds like that's probably something very similar to what your body was reacting to in a way.
Yes, I would say so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at those moments, do you think back to that trauma? Is that something that you pushed out far enough that you kind of didn't think about it a lot, or was that something that was just always there?
For a long time, I never thought about it. I would say from the minute I walked out of the room where he assaulted me, I went up to the theater,
Mm.
sat down with my buddy who'd gone to the movie with me, never thought of it for years. It just blocked.
So that's like your body was protecting you in some way, or was trying to. Your mind was, I guess I should
Yes,
say, you're
yes.
protecting you, and your body was then months later trying to remind you of that in a way, right?
No,
With the
I would
feelings.
say that I found no connection at that time and for a long time
Mm.
with the sexual assault and my depression.
Oh, okay.
See, I had no one to talk. No, there were no professionals I could talk to.
Right.
And what would my parents know? They wouldn't know anything.
Was the family life at home, was that semi normal, or was that like a happy family life and therefore making your depressive moments feel like, why am I feeling this way? Or did you have some issues there too?
Well, it was a normal life,
Okay.
and the issues within my family towards me didn't come up until years later.
Okay. So this, like when you're going through fourth grade,
Hmm.
on the outside, life is seemingly normal for a
Yes,
fourth grader. Yet
yes.
here you are feeling like these adult feelings of depression and why do I exist? What do I offer the world? And so this is probably pretty detrimental to your growth here, right? Like, did you find it challenging to just go through life at that point? Or did you like how does that affect your day to day?
Well, it really didn't affect, except for the thoughts.
Okay.
And I'll
Those are
tell you
good.
other things that happened. I was a stellar student.
Mm,
Right after it happened, and I went into depression. I could no longer study.
mm.
My grades dropped like hell. I didn't want to play with my friends. It was bad. I just was feeling worthless.
How do you move through that? Like, how do you continue on? Because you're here now and you've made it a far way. How does that build in you, or how do you move through that?
Well, it was a hell of a long process. You're
Yeah.
talking, I was 9 at the time. You're talking 50 years to where I was able to become 80% better. It was a strange period for me between seventh grade and college. That's when the depression really took over me. It came in waves, so I might even have a year that was good.
Oh, wow.
Or I
Okay.
might have 2 months, but things changed for a while. I was gone back to a top student, and then basically somewhere along ninth grade, the depression got hold of me, and it was really bad. I
Hmm.
had to cheat to be able to pass my schoolwork. Now, I want to tell you how you can understand how bad this was. After my eighth grade year, I was eighth scholastically in the class out of 210.
Hmm.
By the time I was out, I was somewhere between 180 and 200.
Oh, wow.
So you can see that I no longer had the ability to do anything requiring uh, work and school or anything else. And so, as I said, I began cheating. That's how I got through. And then I went to college and I was better. Well, I'll tell you why. Because I was away from home
Hmm.
and it was new and exciting and it was in Florida. So I felt pretty good.
Yeah. Was a chance
And
to
I
start anew,
graduated.
maybe? A chance to start anew, like a
Yeah,
new you could be someone new.
right. And then when I graduated from college, that's when the deep, deep, horrible depression,
Hmm.
when I was suicidal, came into being. And I finally found a psychiatrist. He diagnosed me as clinically depressed. And for 8 years, they threw medications at me. And I also spent 3 weeks in a mental hospital because I tried to kill my father.
Was this because of a triggered moment, or was it you were
Well,
just so
you
deep
know,
into a cycle?
I told you that family things started coming up later. And it became very clear to me that my father basically didn't care much for me.
Mm.
And one night we were at a barbecue and he really pissed me off. So I picked up a knife and was going to stab him. And then luckily my mind told me, and I went
Mm.
into the mental hospital then.
Oh, wow. So did other people, was that your own doing of going into that mental hospital because you knew, or did other people kind of
No, I
force
did it
that on you?
myself.
Good on you. I mean, that's big
Luckily.
because, yeah, luckily, but also like that takes a strength that when you're in a moment like that a lot of people don't have. So, I mean, I hope you commend yourself for making that decision, because that
Absolutely.
is huge, because I would venture to say that a lot of people don't, or are unable to be that strong for themselves. Did that help? That little stay there help, like reset anything, or did you
Yes,
still?
it did. The
Okay,
suicidal ideations were gone after that
really? Why do you
and
suppose
never
that?
came back. I've never had a suicidal thought since then, and that was 1971.
Wow. And how long were you there?
3 weeks.
3 weeks. And do you think it was like a nice little reset, or was it some medication, or was it some programs that they did, or just getting away?
Well, it was all of the above. I was never
Okay,
on any medication until I went into the hospital,
got it.
and I, for the first time in quite a while, I felt safe,
Hmm.
held for myself. And after that, after I got out of the hospital, and I was still told I was clinically depressed, none of the other medications that they had at that time for depression worked. They'd make me sick. It was horrible. So one day, 6 years later, my psychiatrist came in and said, I made a mistake on your diagnosis. You're
Okay.
bipolar. I
Wow.
said, what the hell's bipolar? Never heard of it.
Right. When is this? The 70s, you say?
70s,
Okay.
78.
Okay. Yeah. So people probably weren't talking about that. It was probably more in books than anything else, right?
Yeah, I'd never heard of it.
Yeah.
So he explained it to me. And basically what it is there's two type of bipolar disorder. One is called bipolar 1, and it manifests itself in deep depression and then zooms up to out of control mania. That's when you see people just spend all their money, they ruin their lives, they get in terrible debt, and then they come crashing down. They've lost their family, they've lost their friends, they've lost everything they had. That was not or is not what I have. I have bipolar 2, which is deep, deep depression, which goes in waves. And when I get out of the depression, I will be pretty well in control. But many times it goes into what's called hypomania, which is a mania that's in between depression and all out mania. To describe what has happened in my life when I was in a hypomanic state, I took my wife a few years ago to buy a car for her. I already had a car, just bought it a year ago. Nothing wrong with it. So when she bought her car, I looked over and I said, I'll take that one too. Now, that's not full-blown mania, but why would I do that? Because I was in hypomania.
Interesting. Is it helpful to know? Like, is it helpful to know that, like, are you aware when you're in a state, or is it, okay, so you're not fully,
I am now.
Okay.
Because I got trauma therapy a few years ago, and I looked back on my life, and we went through everything and saw what was going on. And so I understand it a whole hell of a lot better now.
Okay. So like when you're going through your waves, you're able to self-identify, okay, I'm in this state right now. Here's how I, as an individual Steve, can process this particular moment in life. Is that kind of how life unfolds now?
Going on about what happened when I was diagnosed bipolar, they switched medications and put me on lithium. And when they put me on lithium, I got 50% better overnight, practically.
Wow.
And I was able to resume my life. I screwed up everything. Even after that, I couldn't keep a job, made a lot of mistakes, did a whole bunch of stuff that was bad. But I wasn't in a very bad depression at the time. I was pretty much in control, but my mind had racing thoughts. I couldn't shut my mind down. So as I said, I couldn't keep a job, and the only way I was able to support myself was because my family owned a good-sized clothing business, and I went into the business with them. And the big reason I did that was because I felt safe.
Right.
I was offered a job. I'd been a sports information director at Ohio Wesleyan University, and after my first year, I was only there for filling in for a year. And after that, they came to me and said, we'd like you to go to Ohio University in their sports management program and come back to us and take over the whole thing. Great job, great opportunity. Couldn't do it. Scared.
Yeah.
Unfamiliar. I would have failed miserably. So that ruined what at the time would have been a tremendous thing I always wanted to do.
And was that before or after the diagnosis of bipolar?
That was before.
Before. Okay. Do you think that you would have made different decisions had you already had that diagnosis by then?
If I'd been on lithium, I would have.
Yeah. What does the lithium do for you? Does it just level things out, or does it shrink the curve a little bit?
It takes away a lot of the depression. Now, I'm not on it anymore because it ruined my kidney.
I would imagine.
And I had to have a kidney transplant. That was years later, 20 years later. And anybody who hears that should know that I would not have changed and gone off of lithium any time before that because I was feeling normal. I didn't want to. The worst thing for me was to ever go back into that deep, deep suicidal depression.
Right. You also mentioned that when you were in that mental health hospital for the 3 weeks, like you haven't had a suicidal thought since then. Was any of that experience, I hate to jump back that far, but was any of that experience like one of the first times where you saw other people that felt like you and like you felt a little less alone in that? Like
yes,
depression?
Definitely.
Like seen in a way almost. And I wonder if any of that triggered the sense like, okay, well, maybe I'm not the only one that is in this dire situation. And then therefore the kind of the suicidal ideation subsides a little because you know you're not alone.
Yes, absolutely. And also this is a very specialized hospital I went into in Columbus and did a lot of things. Art therapy, physical therapy, all these things helped me a bunch.
Yeah. And none of the trauma from when you were 9 came up in any of those situations?
In the hospital?
Yeah.
Sure they did. We had
Okay.
group therapy and one-on-one therapy. I was going into therapy 3 times a week. I was so bad at that time.
Okay. And it was all, and you, so you were unpacking some of that trauma from your 9-year-old experience.
No,
Okay. So you
because
weren't
I
talking about
blocked it
that yet.
out. I never even told the psychiatrist or the
Okay.
therapist.
So that never came up in that mental
No,
health stay or
never did.
anything. That was like 50 years later in which you were
Well,
unpacking
I'll
that.
tell you what happened, because psychiatrists, therapists are great, but they screw up from time to time.
Because they're human, I guess, right?
Yes. But anyway, in about 1985,
Mm-hmm.
I'd been with a psychiatrist for 15, 16 years, thought a lot of him, had never told him about what happened to me. So I went into this session and I decided to tell him.
Mm.
He ignored it, wouldn't talk about it. Now, he was a lot older than me. Maybe his upbringing said a man or a kid won't get raped or
Yeah.
whatever, but he just glossed over it. And that set me back another 15
Yeah.
years.
It's like, I can't bring this up because
Yeah,
I guess no one really does care. He was kind of like proving the point
right.
that you hoped he wouldn't.
So,
Like as a 9-year-old, you probably felt that that's why you didn't bring it up then. I mean, I know you push it down, but like a sense of like, I'm not going to say anything because no one's going to believe me and people are going to push it away and dismiss it. And here you go, being open and bold to someone that should listen and acknowledge and help. And he also does what you expected everyone to do so many years prior.
yeah,
I'm sorry that happened to you. It's a shame.
yeah, he really screwed up badly then. And
Yeah.
we never brought it up again, and he never
And you kept seeing
broached the
him,
subject at all.
and you kept seeing him after that. Okay.
He died 2 or 3 years later, but I did keep seeing him.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's interesting because I don't know if you've experienced this too in your therapy journey as well. Like it took me about 20 years to grieve the loss of my mother in a way that I feel properly. And when I was ready to do so, reaching out to therapists because of depression, anxiety, all the things that I'm sure because I pushed things down kind of just manifested in me. But it took me like 5 or 6 people, to go through like try out this therapist
Yes,
for a couple months, doesn't feel right, dismisses things that I think they shouldn't, not as drastic as what you had. But it took me like 6 people to get through. And like, I could
absolutely.
imagine there's tons of people out there that just quit after the first one,
Yes,
and that
absolutely.
sucks.
And I want to tell you now, I think that this is a great segue into the fact that since 2015, I have been facilitating 3 mental health support groups in the Phoenix area. And it has really opened up my eyes to what all of these people go through. I had overall very good therapy. There are so many people out there because of the way, well, most of my people, I would say, are on disability
The people you work with now.
in my group
Okay.
because they have no other way to get therapy. The insurance companies do everything they can to shut down mental health claims. So, and if they can't shut them down, they make the professional psychiatrists and therapists charge so much that 50% of the people who are mentally ill, and by the way, I want to throw out a figure now, 60 million people in the United States have a mental illness. That's 20%. So, and the statistics also say that out of those 60 million, 30 million get no treatment, or
Oh, I believe that.
they can only get treatment through disability, and disability offers them clinics that are completely overrun with sufferers and is a terrible solution. And then disability, which is now just out of sorts, they pay people, and this doesn't just have to be mental illness, it can be a lot of other reasons people go on disability.
Right.
the top amount you can make is about $20,000 a year. If one of these people wants to supplement their income and they go out and get a job, say they get a part-time job making $15,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what does disability do? They come in and say, well, you're making over that 20,000, so you don't get disability anymore. So they cut them off. And now a guy who was getting 20,000 from disability is only making 15,000. So in my estimation, it is a real joke.
Yeah.
And I know this because people consistently talk about it in my groups.
Yeah. And you started these groups because of your experiences. Yes?
Yes. And also, in about the year 1995, I was doing pretty damn well.
Yeah.
And I started speaking to high school psychology classes in and around Ohio. And you know that statistic I gave you that it was 20% were mentally ill? Well, that includes students, young adults. They're also 20% mental problems. So I began talking to high school classes, and what I found was that the schools have no good programs for helping these people. They don't understand what these kids are going through. The kids are under a tremendous amount of pressure. If they're good students and good athletes, their parents and everybody else are pushing them to be better, better, better. So after my talks, I would hold a special session where anybody who wanted to come up and talk to me, I would be glad to hear their story.
Yeah.
This one girl one time came up to me and said, I am, number one, student. She was a senior. I am one of the best athletes in the school, and I am under so much pressure from my parents, from my coaches, from my teachers that I want to kill myself. Right after that, another girl came up. She was different. She was in the middle scholastically. I don't even know if she was an athlete at all, but she said, I have no friends. Nobody likes me. I feel terrible. I want to kill myself. Nothing I could do other than to tell them where to get help.
Yeah.
But the schools don't do anything about it, or they do very little. Now, that was 25 years ago. Today, it is better, but not great.
Yeah. Well, something about that, I feel like that example is the power of story and the power of permission. Like, you came in, told your story, probably were more vulnerable than some of the people that they've ever heard from before. And they felt seen, heard, safe to come up to you and tell you their deepest, darkest secret, because no one else they knew, because their parents were pressuring them and this and that. And if they had said that to any of them, they probably would have been dismissed like you were by your therapist in that moment. And so
the sad thing about that
space.
is I have no idea what happened after they left.
I'm sure you made an impact. I'm sure that something you said, I don't know about you, but the first times I've ever said something out loud, maybe like when I was trying to grieve my mother and how I felt about that, or something stupid that I felt in my head. It wasn't stupid, but something that I felt was stupid inside, and I said it out loud. It kind of lightened the load a little bit. And my hope is that those young ladies that spoke to you, they said it out loud, they heard it, they processed it, they heard your story, and they felt inspired to move through it. And I would hope, because there is some power in releasing that from, I'm sure you feel this too, like letting some steam out of the valve, all that stuff bottled up for me is much scarier in my head than it is when I say it out loud or when I put it on paper or something along those lines.
Well,
So
let's turn the table and go to the flip side of when nothing works for these people. As I said, I've been doing these 3 groups for 9 years now. I've had 2 people kill themselves in my groups. And 3 days ago, one of my group members, who is about 28 or 30 and suffering badly from her illness, her best friend killed herself. So now this girl is in even more imminent danger.
Right.
reacting to her best friend killing herself and everything else that's happening to her.
Yeah.
So not
That's
everybody makes it through. I don't know why this one girl who was in my group was about 25. She was going for her master's in college. She was very depressed, and she said, I'll never hurt myself because I love my grandmother so much, or her mother, whatever one.
Mm-hmm.
And I won't do anything because I'm taking care of her. The next week, she killed herself.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
it is horrible what these people go through and what I went through.
Yeah.
But as I wrote in my book, there's always hope. It's a long, long journey.
Mm-hmm.
There is no cure for any of this, by the way,
Right.
but you can get better and live a productive life. That's
Yeah.
one of the big themes of my book, and I hope it gets through to some people.
Yeah. Do you feel that it's what do you think it is? What do you think that the trick is? Because is it being heard? Is it tools? Is it a little bit of everything? Is it understanding? Is it medicine? What do you think that the key is, or is the key different for everyone?
Well, the key is different for everyone. Medication only works in 50% of the patients.
I believe that.
So there are things you can do, and I just gave a talk on this to my groups the other night. There are therapies that people can do. If medication is working, they can supplement it with these therapies. If medication is not available, these therapies also help very well. Can help. One is EMDR, which is eye movement. It's got a long name.
I've talked to a few people about EMDR, and they found that worked for their trauma.
Yes, there's cognitive behavioral therapy and there's dialectical behavioral therapy. All of these tools are under the guidance of a therapist, but they can do a good job on keeping somebody in control and not as bad if they didn't have them.
Yeah.
Problem. People who are in the not able to be helped therapy because they don't have enough money or insurance, where are they going to hear about these things?
Right.
And they don't.
Right.
So we talk about them a lot in my groups, and they can really work well. There's ketamine treatments and psychedelics that can help. However,
Talk to people about that too.
yeah, talk about the government allowing big pharma to step in and ruin the great therapy. I won't say great, the good therapy for some mentally ill people, ketamine, which was covered by insurance. The government has said that it's not food and drug FDA approved. So the insurance companies have decided not to cover ketamine.
Right.
And ketamine costs about $15,000 a year or more. So that's our government for you. They bow out to whatever big pharma wants.
There's also the complexity of where, earlier when I was like, good on you for putting yourself in that mental health hospital or that setting, because I think there's also something where it takes a lot for someone that is in the throes of hardship to seek out a solution, to seek out. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of energy, and it's a lot of expenditure just physically to admit, to walk through, to ask for help, to try things that don't seemingly work, and then try something else. So I mean, I feel like that's another barrier too, because like that's hard to ask for help.
Well,
I mean, you can say I'm wrong, but I think it is.
You're exactly right.
Okay.
My groups, we talk about this quite a bit. And in the 50% of people who are not, no, that's not right. I would say in all of people who are, most all of the people who are mentally ill, when it comes to going to a therapist, it's a tough thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So people put it off or don't do it. So their own worst enemy. Then when they do go to a therapist and they're helped out and maybe put on medication, well, the guy with the mental problem will take the pill. If it doesn't work right away, and it usually takes a month or so to get working, if it doesn't work in that first few days, they won't take it anymore. They'll never find out if it helped. Then there's the other people who won't take medication for whatever reason. And I've had a lot of those people.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are the people who just won't seek help. They have this stigma against therapists, and they think, oh, they're just boogeymen. They can't help me.
Yeah.
So they stay away from them.
Yeah.
A lot of times it's the patient's fault that they don't get help.
I think that's true. For me personally, that grief journey of losing my mom, 20 years, I pushed it off. I wasn't ready until I was like early 30s to really like start to process it appropriately. And that's when I sought out help. Had I been forced before, like if someone was like, you have to go, I don't think it would have worked. I think I had to be ready. And that's that's a long journey. Luckily, I wasn't in dire straits often. There were times that maybe they were harder than others, but it was really like early 30s when I was like, I need to do this. And I went through that whole thing. Like I went to a psychiatrist. I think one of my 6 was a psychiatrist, and he was like, try this medicine. And then you try it. Then you find it doesn't work, right? After however long you're supposed to wait for it. But then you have to wean off of that one before you try the next one. So now you're in this period of a mess. So eventually I just went away from medications at all and found that when I found the right person, the right things all clicked together and everything kind of worked. But it's a journey. And if you're already depressed or exhausted or all those things, it's like doubly hard to kind of go through that process. So I get it. I get why people battle it. It's not easy. It's not easy.
That is very true. I will say one thing about you giving up the medications because first 1 or 2 didn't work. When I was stricken with my worst time, there were only 3 or 4 medications to help clinical depression and bipolar. Luckily, lithium worked for me. Today, it's been shown that most people have to try many medications till they find the one that works. And the best result comes from a cocktail of medications. 3, 4, 5. I'm on 4. 3, 4, 5 medications that work off of each other.
Work together.
But what you did, you gave it up before. Now, who knows what would have helped? But you got the psychiatrist ended up helping the most. So that was good.
Yeah.
But
I found my journey.
People never give it enough of a try.
Yeah, it was quite a journey, and it's not something that, like you said, like we agreed on. There's a different key for everyone. But I can't help but think about your story now and how you're helping these people, or you are working with these people to help guide them. Do you think that a lot of the reason you do it is because you now are the person you needed when you were younger?
I don't know how to explain it. I have been fortunate enough throughout this journey to learn from when I started speaking to those high school classes that I had a lot to offer in this field. And I didn't want people to have to go through what I went through. And that's been I'd say I've felt that way for many, many years. I wrote the book, Teetering on a Tightrope, to get the word out. And now I've done over 40 podcasts to hopefully, even when I'm gone, the messages I've given will be out there. So people will see it. And that's why I do it. I do it so people don't have to suffer like I did.
Like you did, right. Do you think...
And I get a lot of good out of it myself.
I would imagine, yeah, there's probably some healing piece of every time you're able to help. I just think, like, what if Steve Wilson was like talking at your high school? You know, like when you were a kid and you heard you talking, like not you particularly, but someone that had that was feeling those things like when they were younger, and look at them now, they're thriving, or now they're living a life that feels normal and happy and all the things that you maybe didn't think were possible. Do you think that like that would have changed the trajectory of your life because you saw someone?
No, because it was in the 70s.
Yeah.
I don't have a clue what would happen then. If it were today, hopefully it would have a big impact on me.
Yeah. It's hard. I think about that a lot. Like a 10-year-old version of me, like knew an adult that had a dead parent and grew up just fine. If I would have struggled as much as I did trying to be perfect so that other people wouldn't leave my life like my mom did. I mean, it wasn't of choice, but she died and therefore she left. So I became a perfectionist because I didn't want anyone else to leave. And, kind of like the young version of you took on this unnecessary shame. It was like I took on unnecessary blame that my mom died, but it wasn't it was out of my control. But you just assume these things when you're kids. And I think about, like, had I known someone when I was younger, would I have taken 20 years to grieve that? I don't know. To your point, I don't know. It was the 80s and 90s, and things were different then too.
Well, the question is, where would you be today if you hadn't gone through that kind of stuff? Where would I be today?
Yeah.
I certainly wouldn't be helping people or trying to help people like I am now. So maybe the ends justify the means.
I agree. It's hard to, I think you have to be able to reflect on those moments and get through those moments and think about how there are things to be grateful for.
Yes.
Despite the circumstances that we've gone through. But you're right. I would not be this version of me. You would not be this version of you. You would not be impacting the people in your life the way that you do now had you not struggled through all of those pieces of your life.
Yes,
which is like so crappy. Like, it's not like we want this, but at the same time, like, look what we can do now, because you've kind of, I don't want to say made it to the other side, but you've kind of made it through to a space that feels more comfortable for you compared to that earlier version of you, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
For sure.
That's, I mean, good on you. This is not only do I still get stuck on that, like, you put yourself in a space that you needed to get a little healthier at the time after that incident where you almost did something that you probably would have regretted. But now you make the decision to help other people. You don't have to. You make the choice to do that. And that's big. So kudos to you for impacting so many people from what you've learned and your compassion that you have for these other people.
Well, thanks. And the same to you, too. One of the sad things about the journey to assist people in mental illnesses is that most of the time I never know the outcome. And we have a girl in our group. She's maybe 45, and she was having postpartum depression, and she had a faulty marriage and no support and all this.
Mm-hmm.
And she became very suicidal. And
Mm-hmm.
she tried to commit suicide earlier in her life. And she was on our group one night, and she was really in bad shape. And all of us in the group, we didn't tell her to go. We never in my group give any advice.
Right.
That's not our job. But we suggested that she ought to think about going into a hospital. Well, the next day or two, she went to her therapist, and her therapist said, no, you don't need to go to a hospital. 2 days later, she tried to kill herself. And the only reason she lived is because her husband came in and found her and saved her. It just points out that it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And those stats I gave you before, that's worldwide. That isn't just the U.S.
Yeah.
That's everywhere.
Yeah. It's really, it is a epidemic. It's rough, but you're doing what you can in the space that you are, and you're doing what you know how to do, what you probably needed more of in your life as you were going through your battles, and now you can do it for other people. I think it's commendable, and sometimes it's all we can do is what we can do. We can't change the world, but maybe in the little space that we're in, we can change some lives through that. So I definitely think you're doing that. I like to kind of ask this question, and I know it's not possible, but if this version of you could talk to that fourth grader that was starting to feel very off and very different, is there anything that you would want to tell that younger version of Steve about this journey he was about to go on?
Well, the best thing I could give me when I got assaulted was my support. Too few people in the world are there to support mental illness. Many people believe it's a sham. Many people want to tell you, oh, there's nothing wrong with you, go for a run, something like that. The parents do it, the siblings do it, friends do it. What they should be doing is saying, oh, God, I don't know what to do, but I'm here for you in any way you need me. But so many families don't know what to do, or they don't believe it, or they don't care.
Yeah.
So the big factor I think I could bring myself at that time was my support.
Yeah. A hug. I'm here if you need anything. I'm not
Yeah.
telling you to do anything, but I will listen and I will be here. I think it's probably what I would say to the younger version of myself as well, is that like I felt like I couldn't tell anyone I was sad because everyone didn't want me to be sad, so I needed to be happy. So I think I would say the same to my younger self. Well, thank you for sharing your story. I know it's really not the easiest to share sometimes, but if people want to like check out your book or connect with you, like what's the best way to find you and get in your world?
Well, the title of my book is Teetering on a Tightrope, My Bipolar Journey.
Mm-hmm.
It is on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other places. I don't remember them all.
I'll put a link in the show notes for you.
It's like $12 or $13. It's 160 pages long. It's a quick, easy read. If you want to look at my website, the website is author Steve W. Wilson at gmail.com. Or is it
Okay.
.com? One of those two.
Well, that would be your email address, the Gmail part.
Yeah, so it's .com because it's a
Okay. Perfect. Website.
website.
Awesome.
My own email address is on the website. Anybody can call me if they want to. I am also branching out and offering not expanded by the time, but extra amounts of mental health support groups.
Cool.
There will be 2 other current or past facilitators with me, and we will be offering, and all of our groups are online. We will be, in the next month or so, beginning to offer our support groups wherever you can find them.
Awesome.
We have a guy in Florida. There are 2 of us in Phoenix. We're looking for others, and it's free. And we're just out here to reach out to people who need a helping hand.
Yeah. I need to just hear, be heard, see, know that they're not alone. That's great.
Right.
We'll include all those links in the show notes, or I will include those in the show notes.
Great.
I don't know why I said we, it's just me. But we'll put all that information in the show notes so people can connect with you, reach out to you, share their story, share how your story impacted them. If you're listening now and something that Steve said resonated with you, please reach out to him. Or maybe you know someone in your life that needs to hear Steve's story or needs to be part of one of these groups. Please share this episode with them. We would be so grateful for that. So thank you again, Steve, for sharing your story
Thank
in
you,
this way.
Matt. I sure as hell appreciate it.
For
And if
sure.
you know of anybody doing podcasts in the same area we are, have them get in touch with me, and I'll be glad to do a podcast as a guest.
Sure thing. And anyone listening too, if you have a podcast and you are interested in having Steve share his story in the way that your podcast does it, please reach out to me and I will connect you. And if you are listening, thank you for listening. I am so grateful for you. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye, and I'll be back next week with a brand new episode of the Life Shift podcast. Thanks
Bye,
again,
everybody.
Steve.
Thanks.